welcome to Corinne's Picks. Today we have a very special program. We have Dana Kawano. She's a returning guest. We had a previous episode with her body of work called the Casa Project, which focused on the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War III. She had such a huge body of work. I wanted to bring her back to explore some of her ritual design work. And today we're going to be seeing a tremendous amount of work. I'm going to try to do as little talking as possible. It's a very complicated field of art, very fascinating. So welcome to the show, Dana. As I said, this is your about you and really the work. So welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here, Corinne.
I would really like to discuss even the term ritual. I think it's ritual performance. I believe it's you're designing costumes for ritual performances. So can you talk a little bit about? We're gonna have two programs having to do with this subject. So there are two different bodies of work we're going to be looking at. So can you describe what the two bodies of work we're going to be looking at, but specifically more for this program?
Yes. So primarily, we're going to be looking at the work from Amara Tabor Smith. She's a Yoruba priest and a choreographer, and is using her work to be able to help heal communities, to look at social injustices, and it's basically healing work. There's a spattering of other African-American work that is also included in that slideshow, but it basically is all about healing. Part two will be focused on Dohee Lee. She is a Korean shaman. She is also doing ritual performance work based in traditional shaman work in the Korean culture, but basically taking that with a more modern slant to it. And you'll see much of her work as well in part two.
Okay, terrific. And we're going to be showing like almost 25 images, and then we're going to follow up with, we're going to allow the audience to actually see the costumes in movement and actually in the actual performances, little bits of video. So what goes into, before we show the first slide, what goes into designing our ritual work? Like you said, these are real rituals. It's not art for art's sake. These are actually healing rituals. So what goes into designing this work?
Okay, so basically the choreographer comes up with a concept, and it's based on what is happening in the world today, what is needed in terms of healing, larger than their focus just as artists, but what the world needs in terms of healing our communities, healing from trauma, a lot of that type of thing. And they bring me into the process early on when they start developing the concept. Ideas are bounced off each other, and then they look toward the costumes as a way to pull forward their message, and to be able to help visuals in how audience interprets things, how they might bring about healing in that way.
Okay, great. So, like I said, I'm not gonna try to be quiet for most of this show. So I want to get to the first slide and let the audience know where this performance was and a little bit about the context. Okay, so can we have the first, I guess, first few slides? I guess Dana, you could tell them when you need the next slide.
Okay.
As they go along.
Okay, so this was a concept drawing that was done for a production that was done at Stanford University for the Institute of Diversity in the Arts. It's an Egungun costume. There was participation by the students. We basically incorporated symbolism. You'll see right underneath the head part, there's symbology from the Underground Railroad, and it's just kind of a compilation of what some of the students put together in terms of symbology and pulling from the Yoruba tradition. Okay, next slide. Okay, this one was, it used a mirror for the faceplate. And the question was, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? And it's basically looking at having people look at themselves and reflect upon themselves and their lives and how they want to be during this lifetime to transcend into the next. Next slide. This was Black Power. The performance was about the movement during the late 70s, late 60s, early 70s at Stanford University, the civil rights movement. Next slide. And this was the media at Gungun. Stanford University used their resources there to pull out all of the literature that was written during the time of the movement. And so it pulled all of the media from the newspapers, and we incorporated that into the costumes. These are all Egungun costumes. Egungun costumes are from a Nigerian base or root. It's used in ceremony to honor the ancestors. Next slide, please. Okay, this was a bone dress. It was a ritual performance that was done called Crossing the Great Middle, or the Middle Passage, and it's about the Middle Passage. It spoke about a story of a young woman who was held on a slave ship crossing the Middle Passage. The captain told her to dance. She wouldn't. They strung her up and they dropped her to the deck. And they strung her up again and they dropped her to the deck. And she was about 15, 16 years old. This is telling her story, honoring her. And I was asked to make a bone dress to honor her. The interesting part about it was that after I made it, I was playing with it and found that the bones that were underneath would actually rattle. And so they changed the beginning of the performance where the room was dark, the foghorns blew, and then a spot hit that person in the costume, and she shook it to kind of rattle our cage. Next slide. Okay, so this was kind of an Afrofuture. It was based in the Dogon Mali Afrofuturistic shadow puppet theater, and it incorporated both the Dogon Mali myths of Sirius B, where the cosmos information is infused into the eyes of the Dogon tribe. And it was incorporated with Balinese shadow puppetry in a performance. This was in honor of the it was a program called Who is Ed Mox? It was a Who is Ed Mock? It was a moving performance that went through San Francisco, through many, many sites. You'll see an image on the left-hand bottom corner of Ed Mock. It was the story of his life. He died from the first wave of AIDS. And this particular costume celebrated those ancestors in the Valencia corridor during the time of Ed Mock and during that first wave of AIDS. This was part of a moving installation at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. It focused on 4 women coming up from the bottom of the ocean telling the story of the ocean, how we're polluting it, Middle Passage, many layers of stories, and they are all based in the Yemaya Yoruba tradition about the mother of the ocean. This was also part of that same performance, but it focused on Sarah Bartman, also known as Venus Hottentot. She was from the Khoikhoi tribe, and she died early on in life. She was from Europe and paraded around Europe like a caged animal because of her unique physical characteristics. They found her at a museum that they were holding in France, and they finally returned her. This was in the 1800s, and they finally returned her remains to her original homelands, and we wanted to honor her. So this was part of the Stanford University production. Underneath it is the bone dress, and then we layered it with kind of moss, and it represented an earth spirit. These were the four drawings that were done. These are that at the beginning of the slideshow, they're the finished costumes. They're all the Egungun costumes from Stanford University. Here again is the Venus Hottentot, Sarah Bartman. And these are the Stanford University costumes in motion in their courtyard at Robley Theater.
Okay, that's really fascinating. I believe that's the last photo before we're going to go to the break. So we're going to go to break for commercial, but when we come back, I would love it if you could just briefly explain to the audience what Afrofuturism is, because you briefly used the term once or twice. So we're going to go to a break now, and then we'll come back and talk some more.
Yeah.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move, so I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day, I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
Did you know dragging chains can spark a wildfire?
Only you can prevent wildfires.
So welcome back to Corinne's. We have an incredible guest, Dana Kawano, who's a ritual costume designer. Before we went to break, we were looking at some of her work at Stanford University. having to do with healing, ritual performance, and healing. I do have a brief question for you. Well, we have two questions. I would want you to go into a little bit about Afrofuturism, but then I also want you to talk about the healing aspect of the performance, because some of the stories or explanations I kind of found quite painful in terms of, the girl with the bone dress. I'm wondering, how do you bring up the pain, but how is the performance healing?
Okay, see if I can explain it. When Amara would come up with a concept, basically there is kind of a conjuring or an uncovering of our history of the African American history, which is very difficult to bring up. So she very consciously casts her productions with people who are ready to focus on and to dig into their ancestral roots, some of which is known and some of which is not known. But basically, it's their ability to be able to dive into these very difficult feelings that are inside of them. They're, part of their DNA. And so basically what happens is those folks that are casted are carefully casted in that they're ready to be able to look at some, or deal with some very deep work. And they are part of the journey from the very beginning. And the process is, I want to say, almost collaborative. There are certain activities, there are certain meetings that they have that they speak about specific issues. They speak about their ancestors. They speak about their inner feelings about things, and a very nurturing environment is set that feels very safe for people to be open. And so through that process, some very deep stories and reactions come about. And that is all incorporated into the energy behind the performance. And likely as they are experiencing those and they do perform, the audience is kind of pulled into it, because many times we all have our stories, we all have our ancestral stories, and other people have them too, but they don't have a means or a channel of which they can address those. So doing these ritual performances actually creates an environment that is safe, and for people to be able to go into their own personal experiences by viewing other people's experiences, feeling the energy behind it, and being able to go there in a space that is safe for them to do that. And through that, we believe that is part of healing, is being able to take yourself away from what we're doing in society and this cycle, this wheel that we're turning on, and be able to kind of escape for a moment in a safe place to address all of our traumas, our issues, the reasons why we react to things, and really kind of look at them. That's basically the kind of explanation that I can give. It's very complex, but it's almost like you have to experience it to really feel it.
And okay, so and also briefly, how would you define the aspect of Afrofuturism that's in these performances?
So sometimes Afrofuturism is used, sometimes less so, but my understanding, and I'm not an expert in Afrofuturism, but my understanding of it is that many of the African American people, they don't know their history. They were taken from their homelands and put into an American environment of slavery. Their families were split up. Their grandparents, they don't know. They don't know from what part of Africa maybe that they came from. And with that, takes away a certain amount of grounding for a person. And so Afrofuturism, as I understand it, is a way for African Americans to come up with their story. In some ways, it's imaginative. In some ways, it's recreating myth in a way that will help them to move forward. It's like a positive way of viewing their history and re-establishing a new story to go forward.
Okay. So we have like 8 minutes left. I want to make sure that we can get all those images seen and talked about. Okay, so I'm going to be quiet and we're going to get to the images. So whenever you're ready, Dana.
Okay. This was Amara Tabor Smith and Ellen Sebastian Chang received a creative capital grant for a production called Housefull of Black Women. And through that, there are many episodes. I don't exactly know how many in total they will have, but each episode is themed. And this is an image from one of those episodes. This one was the 4 women that came up from the bottom of the ocean. This is the mermaid with the garbage backpack, telling about the pollution of our oceans. This was from a production called Our Daily Bread. It was remounted like 3 times, very popular, and it was talking about food politics. So this was one of the scenes from that show. This one was also. So in this, speaking about the costumes, this is all African wax print fabric and incorporated into all different kinds of aprons. And then they had the production that spoke about our food politics. This is Rashad Pridgen. He was part of a Vogue dance production for Project Nunway. Project Nunway is put on by the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. And there was a Vogue dance production that we did. So I incorporated Adinkra symbols into each of these jackets.
So, okay, so I feel proud of myself. I got through all the images. I know that we have 3 videos to show, little clips, but before we show the videos, I do want to ask you a question, because I know that you've done quite extensive work in the Afro-American experience or Afro diasporan experience. How has that affected you in terms of your experience as a Japanese American?
Wow. Okay, that's a deep question. It's been an education. The African American experience in America is its own story of history that has been very challenging. What it does for me is that it brings it in unexpected ways, things come up. I remember one time I spoke about being able to go back to Japan and see where my grandparents were born, the village that they were born. And I've had, comments like, well, at least you know who your grandparents are. And, it's comments, it's things like that make me stop and reflect about who I am, how oftentimes I'll think about the difficult experience that Japanese Americans have had in this country, or many of the Asian cultures. And it's been a rare opportunity for me to be able to step deeply into the African American community, and for them to share their history, their heartaches, their challenges.
Okay. So can we see a little bit of those clips before we end the show? Before I have like one more question before we end the show too.
Let's go. Let it ride. You ready? I'm ready. You're natural. All right, don't get dizzy. Wow, that's
I wouldn't drill it with the projector in there.
Wow. Nice. Wow. Love it. Wow. Yeah, blue lights on the head are definitely right.
So it's kind of exciting to hear your voice, hearing you hearing you work with the artists especially the last clip.
Yeah, this is the behind the scenes work. I don't share that with everybody, but it actually is quite something to be able to make a costume and then to have people put them on and go into character immediately is my pay. You know, it's like, it's close to my heart. It's the reason for doing, and something that I really enjoy.
Okay, you know, I want to thank you again. I've seen so much of your work over the years, from like year 2000. I've seen so much of your work, and I've always felt a real connection with you in terms of, you know, when I look at your work, it always reminds me that we're really, you know, human beings, we're really one as a people. Because I look at your work, you're trying to sometimes express yourself as a Japanese American, but I also see my experience in your work as well. So it kind of goes both ways. But I want to thank you for coming on to Corinne's Picks, and I look forward to episode 2 and diving into some more of your work.
Thank you.